My name is Carmen Ortega, and for 20 years I worked as a housekeeper for the Mendoza family, one of the wealthiest and most respected families in the city. I cleaned their marble floors, prepared their meals, kept their secrets. I thought I knew them. I thought they were good people. But the day I went down to that basement, the day I opened that rusted door that had always been forbidden, I discovered something that would destroy that family forever. And today, 5 years later, I can finally tell this story. It all began on a Tuesday in October. A completely normal day, or at least that's what I thought. I was 52 years old when this happened. I had worked for the Mendoza family since I was 32, right after my husband died, and I was left alone with 2 children to feed. Mrs. Victoria Mendoza hired me almost immediately. She needed someone reliable, she told me, someone discreet, someone who would become an invisible part of the house. And that's what I was for 2 decades, invisible but essential. The Mendoza mansion was impressive. 3 floors, 12 bedrooms, a garden that looked like something out of a European magazine, and that basement. That damned basement I never should have entered. Mr. Roberto Mendoza was a successful businessman, owner of several construction companies. He always wore impeccable suits and spoke with that firm voice of someone accustomed to being obeyed. Mrs. Victoria was elegant, cold, perfect in public. They had 2 children, Sebastian, the eldest, who was already 35 when this happened, and Carolina, 32. My days were predictable, and I liked that. I arrived at 6 in the morning, prepared breakfast, cleaned, ironed, organized. At 6 in the evening, I went home to my small apartment across town. Weekends were mine. It was a good life, or at least good enough. For 20 years, there were only 3 absolute rules in that house. First, never ask questions about the family's affairs. Second, never talk to strangers about what happened inside the mansion. And third, never, under any circumstances, go down to the basement. The third rule had never bothered me. It was an enormous house. There was enough to clean on the 3 main floors. The basement was Mr. Roberto's exclusive domain. He kept the only key in his private study. Sometimes he'd go down alone, especially on weekends. I could hear his footsteps on the wooden stairs. He'd stay down there for hours. When he came up, he always had this strange expression on his face, like he was carrying an invisible weight on his shoulders. "What does he keep down there?" I asked Mrs. Victoria once during my 2nd year working there. Her face hardened immediately. "Carmen, that's exactly the kind of question you should never ask. My husband keeps important company documents, confidential papers, nothing that concerns you or me." I never asked again. But I always thought it was strange. If they were just documents, why so much secrecy? Why that reinforced door with 3 locks? Why did Mr. Roberto come out of there with that disturbed look? For years, I simply ignored it. It wasn't my problem. I was there to clean, not to question. But then came that Tuesday in October. It had rained all week, one of those torrential rains that flood the streets and seep water through every crack. That morning, when I arrived at the mansion at 6 o'clock sharp as always, I noticed something different immediately. There was a puddle of water in the 1st floor hallway. "Mrs. Victoria," I said when I found her in the kitchen, "there's a leak. It seems to be coming from below." Her face went pale. "From below?" "Yes, ma'am. From the basement, I think." She pressed her lips together. "My husband is on a business trip in Madrid. He doesn't come back until Friday." She was quiet for a moment, clearly debating internally. Finally, she sighed. "We need to check the damage. If there's a broken pipe, it could get worse." She went up to her room and came back 5 minutes later with a key ring. 3 keys. Her hand trembled slightly as she held them. "I'll go with you," she said in a tense voice. We walked together to the basement door, located at the end of the 1st floor hallway, almost hidden behind an antique cabinet. Mrs. Victoria inserted the 1st key. Click, the 2nd. Click, the 3rd. Click. The door opened with a rusty creak. A damp, stale smell hit us immediately. I found the light switch, and a dim bulb illuminated a steep wooden staircase. "You go down first," said Mrs. Victoria. I'll follow you." But I noticed something in her voice. Fear. She was afraid. I began descending the steps, each one creaking under my weight. The air grew colder with each step, damper. And that smell. It wasn't just dampness. There was something else. Something I couldn't identify, but that turned my stomach. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I looked for another switch. I found it and pressed it. Several fluorescent lights flickered until they turned on completely. And that's when I saw the basement. It wasn't what I expected. It wasn't just business documents. The basement was huge, much larger than the structure of the house suggested. The walls were lined with metal shelves from floor to ceiling, but they didn't contain business documents. They contained photographs, thousands of photographs. I slowly approached the first shelf, feeling my legs barely holding me up. The photographs were organized in albums with handwritten labels. I grabbed one at random. The label said, 1998, Riverside Project. I opened it with trembling hands. The first pages showed empty land. Then construction blueprints. Then buildings, an apartment complex. But there was something else in those photos. In the margins, written in red ink, were annotations. Foundations reduced 40%, grade B material instead of A, falsified inspections, bribes, $200,000. I kept turning pages, more projects, more buildings, and always the same annotations in red: fraud, corruption, inferior materials, bought inspections. "Carmen!" Mrs. Victoria's voice sounded behind me, barely a whisper. "You shouldn't be seeing that." I turned around. She was at the foot of the stairs, white as a ghost, with tears running down her perfectly made-up face. "Mrs. Victoria," I said, my voice breaking. "What is all this?" She closed her eyes. "It's the truth. The truth my husband has been keeping for 30 years. 30 years? She nodded slowly. "Come. There's something else you need to see." She led me to the back of the basement, where there was a wall completely covered by a black curtain. With trembling hands, she drew it back. Behind it was a giant board, like the ones detectives use in movies. But this one was real. Too real. There were photographs of buildings. Below each one, newspaper clippings. And when I started reading the headlines, I felt the floor disappear beneath my feet. Building collapse in Riverside, leaves 12 dead, 2003. Fire in residential complex, 8 fatalities, 2007. Partial tower collapse during earthquake, 23 dead, 2011. Structural failure in office building, 5 seriously injured, 2015. Each clipping was connected with red thread to photographs of the buildings before the tragedies. And all those photographs came from the basement albums. All those buildings had been constructed by the Mendoza Company, with cheap materials, with defective foundations, with falsified inspections. "My God," I whispered, "all those dead people?" 48 people in total, said Mrs. Victoria in a broken voice. "Over 28 years. My husband keeps count of every single one." I turned to look at her. "You knew? How long have you known?" "I found out 15 years ago," she admitted, tears now flowing freely. "After the 2011 collapse. 23 people died, Carmen. 23. And I confronted him. I demanded he turn himself in, confess." "And what did he say?" Her laugh was bitter. "He said if he did that, he'd lose everything. The company, the house, his reputation. Our children would be ruined. He told me he couldn't change the past, that those people were already dead, and that destroying our family wouldn't bring them back. But you accepted that. For 15 years, you lived with this secret." "I'm a coward," she said simply. "A damn coward who chose comfort over justice. And I hate myself for it every day." I looked at the board again. 48 people. 48 lives, destroyed families, orphaned children, all because of greed. Why does he keep all this? I asked. Why document his own crime? Guilt, Victoria answered. Roberto suffers. You've seen it, haven't you? How he comes down here every weekend. How he leaves with that look. He comes here to, I don't know, punish himself? Remind himself of what he did? It's his twisted form of penance, keeping evidence of every death he caused. That's not penance, I said, feeling anger growing in my chest. It's narcissism. It's self-pity. The people who died deserve justice, not the private suffering of a rich man. Victoria looked at me with tired eyes. And what do you propose we do, Carmen? That question changed everything. For 20 years, I had been the invisible employee, the one who didn't ask questions, the one who obeyed. But as I looked at that board, as I thought about 48 people who would never come home, something in me broke. We're going to expose everything, I said. Carmen, you can't. Yes, I can. And you're going to help me. Or I'll do it alone. Victoria was silent for a long moment. Then, slowly, she nodded. All right, but we need to be smart. Roberto comes back in 3 days. If he suspects anything, he'll destroy all this evidence. Then we have 3 days, I said. We're going to document everything. For the next 3 days, I went down to the basement whenever I could. With my phone, I photographed every album, every annotation, every connection on that damned board. I documented 30 years of fraud, corruption, and death. Victoria helped me. Together, we copied files from Roberto's personal computer that we found on a desk at the back of the basement. Emails, altered contracts, bribery records, everything. By Thursday night, we had everything we needed. Now what? Asked Victoria as we came up from the basement for the last time. Now we go to someone who can do something about it. Friday morning, very early, before Roberto returned from Madrid, Victoria and I went together to the offices of the city's most important newspaper. We had contacted them beforehand by email, sending a small sample of what we had. The editor-in-chief was waiting for us. His name was Martin Rojas, and when he saw everything we brought, his face went from skepticism to disbelief and finally to horror. My God, this is huge, he said, going through the printed photographs we had brought. If we publish this, Mr. Mendoza will go to prison for the rest of his life. Good, I said simply. But I need to confirm. Mrs. Mendoza, are you absolutely sure you want to do this? Once we publish, there's no going back. Your life as you know it will end. Victoria took a deep breath. For the first time in 3 days, I saw real determination in her eyes. It already ended anyway, Mr. Rojas. It ended the moment I decided to stay silent 15 years ago. At least now, I can do the right thing. The story was published on Sunday on the front page. In huge letters, construction magnate responsible for 48 deaths over 3 decades. Exclusive documents reveal massive fraud. By Monday morning, Roberto Mendoza was arrested. So were 3 of his main partners and 2 construction inspectors who had accepted bribes. The Mendoza children, Sebastian and Carolina, were devastated. Sebastian, who worked at the company, claimed to know nothing about the fraud. The subsequent investigation confirmed his innocence. Carolina, who was a doctor and had never been involved in the family business, cut off all contact with her parents. The trial lasted 8 months. Roberto Mendoza was sentenced to 35 years in prison for multiple counts of involuntary manslaughter, fraud, corruption, and bribery. At 68 years old, he would die in prison. Victoria received a 3-year suspended sentence for passive complicity. The judge considered that her eventual cooperation and her role in exposing the crimes warranted clemency, but not absolution. She had to perform 1,000 hours of community service and lost all access to the family assets. The mansion was seized. The Mendoza company declared bankruptcy after hundreds of victims and families filed lawsuits. A compensation fund was established, but no amount of money could bring back the dead. As for me, I lost my job, obviously. But I didn't care. The newspaper paid me for my testimony and collaboration. It was enough to live comfortably for a while. Sebastian, the eldest son, looked for me 3 months after the trial. He showed up at my apartment door with red, tired eyes. "Carmen," he said, "I just wanted to thank you. I know you did the right thing, and I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry you worked all those years for a monster without knowing it." "You're not responsible for your father's crimes," I told him. "I know. But I lived in that house. I lived off blood money, and I didn't see anything, or didn't want to see." He took a deep breath. "I've been contacting the victims' families, one by one, asking for forgiveness. I can't give them back their loved ones, but at least I can look them in the eye and say, 'I'm sorry. You're a good man, Sebastian. Don't let your father's sins define who you are.'" He nodded, with tears in his eyes, and left. 5 years have passed since then. Today, I'm 57 years old. I work as a manager at a small hotel. It's honest, quiet work. My children are now adults and independent. My life is simple but dignified. Sometimes I think about that Tuesday in October, about that moment when I went down the stairs to the basement, about that moment when I could have closed my eyes, kept being invisible, maintained my comfortable life. But then I think about the 48 people who died. I think about their families, and I know I did the only thing I could do. Victoria wrote me a letter 2 years ago after completing her community service. It said, "Carmen, thank you for having the courage I didn't have for 15 years. Thank you for forcing me to do the right thing. I live modestly now. I work as a volunteer at a homeless shelter. I can't change the past, but I can try to do something good with the time I have left. Roberto is in prison. My children have forgiven me, but prefer to keep their distance, and I can finally sleep at night. Not in peace, never in peace, but at least without the burden of a secret that was destroying my soul every day. I wish you the best. Victoria." I didn't answer. There was nothing to say. Sometimes people recognize me on the street. Some call me a hero. Others say I should have stayed out of it, that it wasn't my problem. I don't care what they think. I did what I had to do. Not for heroism, not for abstract justice, but because I saw 48 names on that board and I realized they were real people, with families, with dreams, with lives that were stolen by one man's greed. And I, Carmen Ortega, the invisible employee for 20 years, decided I had been invisible long enough. This is my story. The story of what I found in the Mendoza family basement. And if there's anything I learned from all this, it's that silence is not neutrality. Silence is complicity. When you see something wrong and do nothing, you become part of that wrong. I saw, and I acted, and I'll live with that decision for the rest of my life. No regrets. Thank you for listening to my story. If you know someone who's in a similar situation, who knows about something wrong and doesn't know whether to speak up or stay silent, tell them this. The truth always has a cost, but silence has a much higher price, and that price is paid with your soul. If this story impacted you, please like and subscribe to the channel. There are many more stories like this, stories of ordinary people who faced extraordinary decisions, people who decided to do the right thing, no matter the cost.